Act 1. 3 days without water and you're dead. In the bombed-out ruins of Stalingrad, with artillery shells exploding overhead and bodies rotting in the rubble, finding clean water wasn't just about staying hydrated. It was about staying alive. World War II battlefields were wastelands of contaminated water sources. Wells poisoned by retreating armies, rivers clogged with debris and corpses, and bomb craters filled with stagnant, disease-ridden pools. For soldiers fighting in these hellscapes, every drop of safe water was precious. But they found ways. Using techniques passed down through military generations, improvised methods born from desperation, and sometimes just pure luck, combat veterans learned that water procurement was as critical as ammunition supply. A unit that couldn't secure clean water would be combat ineffective within days, regardless of how well-armed they were. The challenge wasn't just finding water. It was finding water that wouldn't kill you. Disease claimed more soldiers than enemy bullets in many campaigns. Dysentery could destroy an entire company's fighting strength. Cholera could spread through trenches faster than wildfire. Typhoid turned strong men into invalids. Every sip from an unknown source was a calculated risk that could determine whether a soldier lived to see the next battle. In the Pacific Theater, American Marines fighting through tropical islands faced a cruel irony. They were surrounded by water, yet constantly fighting dehydration. Jungle streams that looked crystal clear harbored invisible killers. Local water sources that had sustained island populations for centuries could devastate soldiers whose immune systems had no defenses against tropical pathogens. European battlefields presented different but equally deadly challenges. Urban warfare meant fighting through cities where bombing had destroyed every piece of infrastructure. Water treatment plants lay in ruins. Distribution systems were shattered. Soldiers had to navigate through rubble-filled streets, searching for any intact source, while dodging sniper fire and artillery bombardments. The North African campaign was perhaps the most unforgiving. In the vast emptiness of the Sahara, water became more valuable than gold. Soldiers carried personal rations that had to sustain them between supply drops that might be days apart. Every movement had to be calculated against water consumption. Every tactical decision weighed the cost in precious fluids against potential military gain. Winter warfare added another layer of complexity. On the Eastern Front, soldiers discovered that snow and ice weren't automatically safe water sources. Contaminated snow could carry the same diseases as liquid water. Melting snow required fuel that was often in short supply. Ice formations might contain months of accumulated pollutants. Even in environments where water seemed abundant in frozen form, procurement remained a constant challenge. Soldiers quickly learned that peacetime water safety rules didn't apply in combat zones. Sources that would be perfectly safe in civilian life became death traps in war. A village well that had served a community for generations might be poisoned by retreating forces. A mountain stream that ran clear and cold could be contaminated by upstream battle casualties. Rivers that appeared pristine might carry industrial chemicals from bombed factories miles upstream. The psychological aspect was just as important as the physical challenge. Soldiers had to overcome their natural instincts to drink from any available source when desperately thirsty. Training and discipline had to override the most basic human survival drive. Veterans learned to teach new arrivals that patience in water procurement could mean the difference between completing the mission and being evacuated as a medical casualty. Supply chain disruptions made the problem worse. Military water purification tablets were standard issue, but supply lines frequently broke down under enemy action. Units might go weeks without resupply, forcing them to rely entirely on field expedient methods. Medical supplies that could be used for water purification were often needed for treating wounded soldiers, creating impossible choices for unit medics. Communication networks carried constant warnings about water safety, but battlefield conditions often made it impossible to verify water sources or coordinate with other units about safe supplies. Soldiers had to make life-or-death decisions based on limited information and quickly changing tactical situations. The stakes couldn't have been higher. A single contaminated water source could destroy a unit's combat effectiveness more thoroughly than enemy action. Medical evacuation of disease casualties strained resources that were desperately needed elsewhere. Hospital ships and field hospitals filled with soldiers suffering from preventable illnesses that could have been avoided with proper water procurement techniques. Yet soldiers adapted. They developed informal networks for sharing information about safe water sources. Veterans passed down knowledge to replacements. Unit medics became experts in field water purification. Combat engineers improvised filtration systems from available materials. Infantry squads learned to work together to secure and purify water supplies under the most dangerous conditions. The story of how World War II soldiers found drinkable water is really the story of human adaptation under extreme pressure. It's about ordinary people finding extraordinary solutions to fundamental survival problems. It's about the ingenuity that emerges when training meets desperation and the will to survive overcomes seemingly impossible obstacles. Act 2. Finding water in combat zones meant navigating a deadly puzzle where every decision could kill you faster than enemy fire. The first rule every soldier learned was burned into their minds during training. Assume every water source is contaminated until proven otherwise. But proving safety in the middle of a firefight was a luxury few could afford. Enemy forces routinely poisoned wells before retreating, turning basic infrastructure into weapons. German forces withdrawing from North Africa dumped motor oil, gasoline, and even human waste into wells that had sustained desert communities for centuries. Japanese defenders in the Pacific Islands poisoned water sources with everything from industrial chemicals to decomposing animal carcasses. Soviet forces scorched earthing their retreat from advancing Germans left no water source untouched. Dead animals and human remains fouled streams and ponds across every theater of war. A single decomposing corpse upstream could contaminate miles of river water. Artillery bombardments created massive crater lakes that collected runoff from surrounding battlefields, concentrating contamination into toxic pools. The sweet smell of rotting flesh that permeated major battle sites served as a constant reminder that any water source might be deadly. Industrial contamination added another layer of danger that soldiers were rarely trained to recognize. Bombed factories leaked chemicals into groundwater systems. Fuel depots created petroleum slicks that could poison entire watersheds. Ammunition dumps spread heavy metals and explosives residue into soil that eventually reached water tables. Chemical weapons used in some theaters left invisible contamination that could persist for months. In the Pacific Theater, soldiers faced challenges that seemed designed by nature to kill them. Tropical diseases thrived in the constant heat and humidity. Dengue fever, malaria, and yellow fever turned mosquito breeding areas around stagnant water into biological weapons. Japanese encephalitis could be contracted from water sources that seemed perfectly clean. Leptospirosis bacteria survived in water that looked and tasted normal but could cause kidney failure within days. The jungle environment itself was hostile to water safety. Vegetation rotted constantly in the humidity, creating organic contamination in streams. Parasites that had evolved over millions of years to survive in tropical water systems could devastate soldiers whose immune systems had no natural defenses. Local populations had built immunity over generations to pathogens that could kill outsiders within hours. Monsoon seasons created particularly dangerous situations. Heavy rains would wash contamination from battlefields into every water source simultaneously. Flash floods mixed surface pollution with groundwater, spreading contamination across entire regions. Standing water created perfect breeding conditions for disease vectors, while also serving as the only available water source for desperate soldiers. European urban warfare presented its own unique water challenges. Bombing campaigns had systematically targeted infrastructure, leaving major cities without functioning water systems. In Berlin, Hamburg, and dozens of other German cities, water mains lay shattered beneath tons of rubble. Sewage systems had collapsed, mixing human waste with any available water supplies. Soldiers fighting through these urban environments had to navigate through destroyed buildings while searching for intact water sources. Basement cisterns might contain clean water, but reaching them meant exposing themselves to sniper fire. Rooftop water tanks could be accessed, but climbing to reach them made soldiers perfect targets for enemy marksmen. Chemical contamination in cities was particularly insidious. Bombed pharmaceutical plants released unknown chemicals into local water systems. Destroyed gas stations and fuel depots created petroleum contamination that was immediately obvious but difficult to avoid. Industrial sites leaked heavy metals and toxic compounds that had no taste or smell but could cause long-term health effects that wouldn't manifest until years after the war. The North African campaign created the most straightforward but brutal water challenges. In the vast emptiness of the desert, water sources were rare and obvious targets for enemy action. Both sides understood that controlling water meant controlling territory. Oases became strategic objectives as important as fuel depots or ammunition supplies. Desert warfare meant that every drop of water had to be carefully calculated against mission requirements. Soldiers carried personal rations measured in ounces rather than gallons. Every movement had to be weighed against water consumption rates. Tactical decisions were influenced as much by hydration requirements as by enemy positions. Heat injuries became a constant threat that could eliminate soldiers as effectively as enemy fire. Dehydration reduced combat effectiveness long before it became life-threatening. Heat exhaustion could incapacitate entire units during critical operations. Heat stroke could kill healthy soldiers within hours if water replacement couldn't keep up with fluid loss rates. Sandstorms created additional complications by contaminating any water containers that weren't perfectly sealed. Fine sand infiltrated everything, turning drinking water into an abrasive slurry that could damage teeth and digestive systems. Dust clouds made it impossible to see potential water sources or evaluate their safety from a distance. The psychological pressure of constant thirst affected decision-making in ways that training couldn't fully prepare soldiers for. Dehydrated soldiers made poor tactical choices, took unnecessary risks, and lost the mental clarity needed for survival in combat situations. Units that couldn't maintain adequate water supplies quickly lost their fighting effectiveness regardless of other supply levels. Supply chain vulnerabilities made all these challenges worse. Water is heavy and bulky, making it difficult to transport across contested terrain. Enemy forces specifically targeted water supply convoys and distribution points. Medical evacuation of heat casualties or disease victims strained resources that were desperately needed for combat operations. Act 3. Soldiers developed a strict hierarchy of water sources that could mean the difference between life and death on the battlefield. This wasn't academic theory learned in training manuals, but hard-won knowledge passed down from veteran to rookie in foxholes and field hospitals across every theater of war. Underground sources ranked highest in the soldiers' water safety pyramid. Artesian springs, deep wells, and flowing underground streams represented the gold standard of battlefield water procurement. These sources were less likely to be contaminated by surface pollution, dead bodies, or enemy sabotage. Combat engineers became expert at locating damaged but still functional water mains in urban environments, following broken pipe systems to find clean water still flowing from intact sections deep underground. Soldiers learned to recognize the signs of good underground water sources. Concrete structures with small cracks often indicated water pressure from below. Basement areas that remained damp even during dry periods suggested underground seepage that might be tapped. Vegetation that stayed green while surrounding plants withered often marked underground water sources that could be accessed by digging. Military water purification tablets were standard-issue equipment, but battlefield realities quickly taught soldiers that supply couldn't be counted on. A single infantry company could exhaust its tablet supply in days during intense combat operations. Supply lines broke down under enemy fire, airdrops missed their targets, and logistics units had to prioritize ammunition and medical supplies over water purification chemicals. When tablets ran out, soldiers fell back on purification methods that their grandfathers might have used in previous wars. These techniques required no special equipment, used materials available on any battlefield, and could be implemented even under enemy fire. Veterans became teachers, passing down knowledge that often meant the difference between completing a mission and being evacuated as a medical casualty. Boiling represented the gold standard of field water purification, but it required solving multiple logistical challenges simultaneously. Fuel had to be conserved for cooking food, heating shelters, and sometimes for weapons maintenance. Fires attracted enemy attention, especially at night when flame light could be seen for miles. The time required to bring water to a full boil and maintain that temperature left soldiers exposed and unable to move quickly if tactical situations changed. Soldiers learned to coordinate boiling operations with other unit activities. Water would be boiled during established meal times when cooking fires were already necessary. Combat engineers shared portable stoves with infantry units when fuel supplies allowed. Small unit leaders learned to time water purification operations with periods of reduced enemy activity or when units were in defensive positions that provided some protection from observation. The boiling process itself became refined through battlefield experience. Water had to reach a full rolling boil for at least 1 minute at sea level, but soldiers fighting in mountainous terrain learned that higher altitudes required longer boiling times. Veterans taught newcomers to look for the vigorous bubbling that indicated true sterilization temperature rather than just hot water that might still harbor deadly pathogens. Cloth filtration became the most commonly used field expedient method because it required no special equipment and could be done quickly even under combat conditions. Multiple layers of fabric, preferably clean uniform material, could remove visible particles, dead insects, and larger debris that might harbor bacteria. The technique wasn't perfect, but it significantly reduced the contamination load in water that would then receive additional treatment. Soldiers learned that different fabrics had different filtration properties. Tightly woven cotton uniform material worked better than loosely woven wool. Multiple layers were always better than single layers, but too many layers would slow filtration to impractical rates. Clean fabric worked better than dirty fabric, but even dirty uniform material could remove large particles and debris that would otherwise make water dangerous to drink. The cloth filtration technique evolved to use materials specifically chosen for their availability on battlefields. Undershirts became prized for their tight weave and relatively clean condition. Bandages from medical kits could be used when uniform material wasn't available. Even dirty rags could be used in emergency situations when properly layered and combined with other purification methods. Sand and charcoal filtration represented a more sophisticated field technique that could remove chemical contaminants as well as biological hazards. Soldiers learned to build these systems using metal containers with holes punched in the bottom, layering sand, crushed charcoal from campfires, and more sand to create a filtration system that could process large quantities of water relatively quickly. The charcoal component was crucial because it could absorb chemical contaminants that other methods couldn't remove. Soldiers learned to create charcoal from fires when commercial activated charcoal wasn't available. Wood fires provided charcoal that could be crushed and used immediately. Ammunition packing materials often contained charcoal that could be repurposed for water filtration. Sand filtration layers had to be carefully constructed to work effectively. Fine sand worked better than coarse sand for removing small particles, but it also filtered more slowly. Coarse sand allowed faster flow, but didn't remove smaller contaminants. Veterans learned to build layered systems with coarse sand at the bottom for fast drainage and fine sand at the top for particle removal. Chemical purification methods beyond military issue tablets relied on medical supplies and improvised solutions that soldiers learned to create from available materials. Iodine from medical kits became a standard alternative to water purification tablets. 2 drops per quart of clear water, for drops if the water was cloudy, followed by a 30-minute waiting period that often seemed like an eternity to thirsty soldiers under enemy fire. The metallic taste of iodine-treated water was universally hated, but soldiers learned that the bitter flavor was a small price to pay for avoiding the dysentery, cholera, and typhoid that killed more soldiers than enemy bullets in many campaigns. Some units learned to add flavor crystals from ration packs to mask the iodine taste, though medical personnel warned that additional chemicals might interfere with purification effectiveness. Silver coins were carried by some soldiers who believed they had antibacterial properties when left in water containers overnight. While the scientific basis for this technique was questionable, the psychological benefit of any additional safety measure was valuable for maintaining unit morale in situations where clean water was scarce and contamination risks were high. Act 4. March 15, 1945. Cologne, Germany. The ancient cathedral city lies in ruins after months of Allied bombing and weeks of house-to-house fighting. Staff Sergeant Mike O'Brien leads his 9-man squad through streets choked with rubble, their water supplies critically low after 4 days of continuous combat operations. The city's water infrastructure has been systematically destroyed. Treatment plants stand as hollow concrete shells. Distribution networks lie shattered beneath collapsed buildings. The Rhine River, normally the city's primary water source, flows thick with debris, fuel oil from bombed installations, and worse contamination from upstream battle sites. Day 1 begins before dawn as O'Brien's squad moves through the industrial district, searching for German holdouts while desperately needing to locate water sources. Each man carries 2 canteens that should provide water for 24 hours under normal conditions, but combat operations in urban terrain have doubled their fluid requirements. Constant movement through rubble, the stress of house-to-house fighting, and the physical demands of carrying full combat loads in late winter weather have pushed every man close to dehydration. The breakthrough comes when Private First Class Johnson, the squad's youngest member, notices something unusual in the basement of a partially collapsed apartment building. While the rest of the squad clears the ground floor, Johnson investigates a steady dripping sound echoing from below. Descending carefully through debris-filled stairs, he discovers a broken water main still producing a steady trickle of clean water from an underground distribution system that somehow survived the bombing. O'Brien makes the tactical decision to establish a temporary base in the building's basement, using steel helmets as collection vessels to gather several gallons of precious clean water. The underground source appears uncontaminated, flowing directly from deeper distribution lines that haven't been exposed to surface pollution. No purification is necessary, and for the first time in days, every man in the squad can drink his fill. But battlefield conditions change rapidly. Day 2 arrives with the underground flow reduced to barely a trickle as municipal water pressure finally fails completely. The squad must move forward to maintain contact with enemy positions, leaving their secure water source behind. O'Brien knows they need to find replacement sources immediately or face the choice between tactical effectiveness and basic survival. The search becomes systematic and dangerous. Moving through contested streets under occasional sniper fire, the squad checks every basement, every bomb crater, every partially standing building for potential water sources. They discover that most bomb craters have filled with rainwater, but contamination levels make these sources extremely dangerous without extensive treatment. The largest crater, formed by what appears to have been a massive artillery shell, contains nearly 50 gallons of accumulated rainwater. But the water is contaminated with debris from destroyed buildings, oil from damaged vehicles, and organic matter that makes it smell foul even from a distance. Private Martinez, the squad medic, declares it unusable without extensive filtration and purification that would require time and materials they don't possess. Johnson suggests trying the sand filtration technique he learned from a veteran sergeant back at the replacement depot. Using punctured ration cans and materials scavenged from the battlefield, the squad constructs improvised filter systems. Sand collected from areas not obviously contaminated gets layered with crushed charcoal from cooking fires and more sand to create crude but functional filtration devices. The process is painfully slow. Each filter system can process perhaps a quart of water every 30 minutes, and the squad needs gallons to maintain operational effectiveness. But the filtered water, while still cloudy and unappetizing, appears much cleaner than the raw crater water. Martinez contributes precious iodine from his medical kit to provide final purification, giving each man half his normal daily water ration. Day 3 brings new challenges as the tactical situation evolves and no new water sources are discovered. The squad has been ordered to advance toward the city center, leaving behind even the contaminated crater that provided yesterday's water. Martinez makes the difficult decision to contribute additional iodine from medical supplies, knowing that using first aid supplies for water purification reduces his ability to treat combat casualties. The squad locates a well in what was once a small residential courtyard, now surrounded by the hollow shells of destroyed houses. The well appears intact, but the water level is far below the reach of any container they carry. Corporal Williams, the squad's combat engineer, improvises a solution using communications wire and a steel helmet to create a bucket system that can reach the water. The well water appears relatively clean, but has an unusual taste that raises concerns about chemical contamination from nearby destroyed buildings. Martinez tests it carefully, looking for obvious signs of petroleum products or industrial chemicals. Finding none, he authorizes its use but insists on combining cloth filtration with chemical purification to provide maximum safety margins. The squad shares a small fire built in the shelter of a destroyed wall, using combustible materials salvaged from the battlefield to heat water in mess kits. The fire has to be kept small to avoid attracting enemy attention, and water must be boiled in small batches that take precious time while exposed to potential sniper fire. Each man takes turns standing guard, while others focus on water purification operations. They've learned to collect morning dew using clean cloth draped over equipment overnight, a technique that provides small amounts of additional water with minimal contamination risk. Undershirts stretched between rifle stocks and backpack frames can collect several ounces of clean water during humid nights, every drop precious when operating on minimal reserves. Day 4 arrives with the sound of tracked vehicles and the distinctive rumble of supply trucks moving up through secured streets. Resupply has finally reached their sector, bringing not just ammunition and food, but precious water and official military purification tablets. Each man receives a full day's water ration plus emergency reserves, the first time in nearly a week that anyone in the squad can drink without calculating fluid conservation requirements. But the experience has changed them permanently. O'Brien's squad continues collecting and purifying water whenever possible, building reserves that could mean the difference between completing future missions and becoming casualties. They've learned techniques that weren't in any training manual, developed instincts about water safety that come from direct experience with life or death consequences. The veteran soldiers pass this knowledge to replacement troops who join the unit, just as earlier veterans taught them. Water procurement has become just another combat skill, as essential as marksmanship or small unit tactics. In the ruins of Cologne, they learned that survival often depends on the most basic human needs, and that finding safe drinking water in hostile environments requires the same careful planning and tactical thinking as any other military operation. These techniques would serve them through the remainder of the European campaign and, for those who survived, in future conflicts around the world. The ability to find and purify water in the most hostile environments became part of their professional military expertise, knowledge that could keep soldiers alive in any battlefield from the frozen mountains of Korea to the jungles of Southeast Asia.